Welcome to part 2 in my talk on publishing for artists. In this part, we really get into the technical details. So we're going to talk about all of the equipment and the way that we actually go from photographing the art to doing the digital imaging to actually doing the prints. And we're going to provide a scenario for a budget-based kind of setup, and then what we do to do really, really high quality prints up to 4 feet by 7 feet. So stick around, I'll get to that. So now we're going to get into the actual process of how you actually photograph your work, do the digital imaging, and do the printing. But before we do that, I need to talk about color spaces and file types. And so some of this stuff is very technical. And I mean, I kind of know, when I did some review of this stuff, but I kind of know this stuff now because I've been doing it for a long time, but it's a lot to take in. This is the one thing I had real trouble with, first of all, was color spaces. So there are 3 basic color spaces. There's sRGB, which stands for standard red, green, blue. There's Adobe RGB, and then there's ProPhoto RGB. Now, as artists, what you have to think of this as, it would be like if you were, sRGB is what's used on the internet, and it's the best for using on the internet. And that would be like if you were creating a painting with a dirty red, a dirty blue, and a dirty yellow. There's limits to the colors that you can mix with that, right? Adobe RGB would be like if you had a pure process magenta, a cyan blue, and a process yellow. You could print most of the colors. Now, there's still that whole thing, whenever you mix 2, you lose some intensity. So you couldn't mix a pure cadmium orange or a pure kind of lime green. But ProPhoto RGB would be like if you had access to the entire outside of the color wheel and had pure versions of every one. So those 3 spaces, when you're working on your computer, you get to choose what color space you're working in. And the whole idea is the more colors you can show and the more vivid colors you can show, the larger the file will be. And so that's when we get into the internet, why sRGB is so good, because it is a very small file space. So that is in JPEGs. When you save them in sRGB, what it does, so if you have I don't know, this whole area up here in the blues and mauves, and there's a lot of subtle differences going on. What it does in a JPEG is if this stroke of color goes across here, say for 2 inches, it'll just write down the RGB value of that first pixel, and then it'll say repeat that 60 times across. And it'll also say anything that's even kind of sort of close to that, make it the same color. So you lose a lot of the subtleties, and you also lose a lot of those slight variations, and you lose the ability to produce pure and intense colors. But on the internet, because file size is so important, because nobody, first of all, wants to sit and wait 10 minutes for an image to load, and secondly, we're usually looking at them fairly small. It's only 72 dots per inch. So we're looking at a small image size. You couldn't even see those differences anyways. So on the internet, you want to use JPEGs and sRGB. Adobe RGB, which is much better than that, is what a lot of commercial printers use still. I'm surprised, but yeah, there's still a lot of printers out there that are using Adobe RGB. I don't know why, but we do everything in ProPhoto RGB because we want to get the maximum subtleties in the color variations. We also want, you can see how bright and intense the colors that I paint in are. I want to be able to reproduce that on canvas. Yes. You'll go and you'll be able to choose the color space. Yeah. Where was I going with that? Oh, and so the other thing about, so here's the thing about, so you got to understand the color spaces, and then you got to understand with the JPEG too, what a lot of people don't realize, so it compresses every time it saves. So when it saves, it'll say, instead of recording the RGB value of all those pixels, just record the one, and then say do it 40 more times. If you make a change to that JPEG and then save it, it'll compress everything again. So it keeps compressing, so if you make a change and save, make a change, save, make a change, save, make a change, save, it's not just saving your changes, it's compressing everything else all the time. So you end up losing some of that subtlety every time you do it. So that's why JPEG is a really good end
end product file type to post on the internet, but it's not a good idea to do a lot of your editing in there. So the other file that you use most of the time is a TIFF. It stands for Target Image File Format. But what a TIFF does is a TIFF records every pixel. And so when you make changes, and then you save, it just changes those pixels you've changed, and everything else stays the same. And then there's an even larger file format, which is called RAW. And that gets into when you're actually shooting. If any of you that have a reasonably new digital camera, you will see that there's the ability to shoot in RAW. And you should always shoot in RAW when you're shooting your photos. RAW. It's just because it means it's the raw image. Because even if you save in a TIFF, there's some compression that goes on from what actually comes in. But also, TIFF, if you're saving in a TIFF too often, and don't shoot in modes, so like landscape mode, portrait mode, whatever, because they have already, there's certain things they do to shift the color one way or the other. So when you shoot in RAW, it just records the actual RGB value of every single point that gets hit on the CCD chip. So there's no change made to it. And you should do all of your digital editing in RAW as well. And so the idea is because it's the actual, the raw thing that the photograph took, or the camera took, with no changes made. No, once you've got the image to where you like it, then you save it as a TIFF or export it as a TIFF.
And you never export it as a JPEG?
You have to export it as a JPEG to go on the web.
Oh no, I don't understand that. I meant for the printing.
No.
So you're going to be printing the print format as a TIFF?
TIFF. It's always going to be TIFF. I'll get into that later, but you have to understand, before I start telling you what to do,
No, I totally get it.
yeah, that's kind of the difference. So basically, what you want to do is, so the higher the color gamut you want, the variety of colors and the more subtlety you want to use, the more you need to go to either Adobe RGB or ProPhoto RGB, but then you have to consider what is the output going to be, because you only want it to match the output. So if I have and I made the mistake when I first started learning a little bit, I was sending all of my galleries JPEGs, but they were in ProPhoto color space. And they looked horrible, because the ProPhoto is trying to display all of these great, bright, intense colors that are not even displayable on the internet, because you're dealing with a dirty red, dirty blue, dirty yellow. So you have to have the appropriate output of the image to where it's actually going to end up. So I just recently did work for someone that's getting some stuff printed, and their printer wanted it in Adobe RGB rather than ProPhoto. I can only, potentially that's because they're doing offset litho. And if you're doing offset litho, that's a good choice, because offset lithography cannot reproduce the bright and intense colors that we can with giclée printing. So there's no point in having this beautiful ProPhoto image when it can't be reproduced in the output. So we do everything in ProPhoto, but that's because our printer can actually print outside of the gamut of what ProPhoto is. Okay, so now we've got that under. Now we're going to talk about kind of starting publishing, and I'm going to give you a very budget-based how you can start. So if you want to start doing things this size, which would also allow you to do, yeah, so you could also do these, all of the prints that I have there up on the wall that are framed on canvas, it would allow you to do that. And so what you need for that is a decent DSLR camera. And you could, so mine was that I started with was an Olympus, 12 years old, it was a 10 megapixel. Any half-decent DSLR will be better than that now. You need a polarizing filter if you're going to be shooting oils or acrylics. If you're going to be shooting watercolors, I wouldn't worry about it. You need a tripod, and you need a half-decent computer that's capable of handling fairly large file sizes, but not crazy. But you can't be, if you're using a 10-year-old PC, this is probably not going to work. Although I did that on a 10-year-old PC. So anyways, the better the computer, the better. You're also, so those are things that I had. Again, there's a couple things I did not have that I would really recommend you get that are fairly inexpensive. And this is a passport color checker. So the passport is the name, and it's a color checker. And this thing is amazing. So what this does is this chart is all very specific Pantone colors that have a very specific RGB or CMYK, whatever color space you're in, number for them. And what you do with this, because you know when you shoot a photograph, the image you get is only partly dependent on the painting. The light and the white balance that you've put into that you've set for the camera has a huge impact on what actually is shown in the actual image. So what this does, you shoot this, and this comes with software as well. You shoot this, and then on the computer, you take the image that you've shot, and you go through, it's in Lightroom, where you import this image, and you get it to do the diagnostics. And what the computer does is it knows what all of these are supposed to be showing, and it actually reads what they are showing, and then it does a color adjustment to make them all accurate. Then you apply that to the image you've shot of your painting, and it does 95% of your color correction like that.
Can that not be done in Photoshop?
It might be, I'm not sure. And any of this stuff specifically, what I would say is there's a great resource, because this is changing all the time, and that's Google. Just Google YouTube video, how do I use a passport color checker? Because this is coming up with new software all the time. Lightroom's changing you used to have to, in Lightroom, go through this advanced thing. Now you just click on it and it does it. So anything like that in the specifics, just Google. Yep.
I just wanted to ask you, where did you purchase that?
This is Vistec. Vistec.
But I was just going to ask you, is it possible to buy that at Henry's?
I have no idea.
Okay, check Amazon too.
You might be able to. I just know Vistec has been so good to me, they get all of my business. The only reason I don't buy the canvas from them is they don't sell it. But Vistec, I will buy everything from Vistec just because, well, first of all, I also know they've never steered me wrong. And I just feel like, you dance with the ones that brought you, never taken advantage of me, they never will, I don't think. So anyways, that's the passport color checker.
Regarding the polarizing filter, do you have any comments on, because I know there's different kinds, right?
Vistec.
Just ask them.
Ask them. That's all I do. If I go down, here's what I want. Here's what you need. Thank you. Like literally, that's why I get everything from them. And because this stuff's changing all the time too, right? I can't keep up on it, but they are. So the next thing that I would recommend is a colorimeter. I saw it, so on this, that video with Jeff Shuey and Michael Reichman about camera to print, and they were like, okay, this is pretty silly, I know, but maybe there's some people out there who don't know what this is, so we're gonna go into it. This is a colorimeter, and I'm like, I don't have a clue what that is.
How do you spell it?
Color, just color, and then IMETR, colorimeter. What this is, so again, we get back to that whole thing that you have to have your color managed through every step of the process. Well, there's no point working like crazy on your monitor if your monitor's way off, right? So what this is for is to calibrate your monitor. So it's very similar to this concept. What you do, this comes with software. So you open the program to run the diagnostic. This is just a magnet that attaches to the back of your computer. And what happens on your monitor, you get a rectangle that comes up about this big. You hang this over there so that the eye of the colorimeter is over that rectangle. What it then does is it projects about 150 different rectangles of grays and different colors, and it monitors what is the actual computer showing and how does that differ from what it's supposed to be, and then it applies that to your computer to set it so that it's showing color accurately. So these two things would have saved me hundreds of dollars worth of paper of just editing based on how the print comes out, right? Because you have to know that what you're looking at is reasonably accurate. So those two things I would say you need, and I did not have. Those are the only two things that I didn't have. And then the next thing is a desktop Giclée printer. And you can get an Epson Stylus Pro desktop, I just checked, that will print 13 inches wide, I believe, for around $1,000. So for those things that I mentioned, so you probably have a decent DSLR, a tripod, a computer. You may or may not have a polarizing filter. That's a couple $100. I think that's around $100. That's probably a couple $100. So that and a printer, and you could be producing prints like this on canvas, 13 inches wide, as long as you want, on canvas. So that's pretty good. Yep.
Do you have to use a polarizing filter because the acrylic and oil is not like flat?
I'll get into that when I actually get into, so just talking about the equipment, now I'm going to get into the setup of the photography. So with that kind of bare bones equipment, you could be up and running and actually not only photographing, but creating your own prints. And the fact that you don't have to varnish, because if I had given this lecture a year ago, it's like, and you need to set up a varnishing booth, and you need to have storage for the prints, because it's not feasible to print them one at a time. It really is, like literally, for most of you, you're looking at about a $1,200 to $1,500 investment to be off to the races printing things that are up to 13 inches wide. That's pretty sweet. So the setup, if you're gonna photograph like this, then I'm going to talk about that. So the first thing is the best way to photograph if you don't have dedicated lights is with natural light and on an overcast day. So what you want to do, the best way to do it is on a day that's cloudy, take it outside. Either, we used to hang the big ones on a fence or put them on an easel. Set your camera on a tripod. And the important thing is when you're setting up your camera, you want to imagine the exact center of the painting and a perpendicular line coming out, and that's where you want the lens of the camera to be. Otherwise, you get keystoning, right? If the camera's too high, it does this. If it's too low, it does this. If you're off to the side. So basically, and you can just do that by eye, just kind of moving it out. I mean, obviously, if it's tilted back, the camera needs to be higher. But you basically just, the way you can tell that it's pretty perfect is all of the sides are parallel to the edge of the picture plane that you see through the viewfinder. So you set it up like that. Then you need to do a custom white balance because the light is going to be slightly different every day. Do not use the daylight. Now, those are presets that are general. So again, to set a custom white balance in your camera, you'll have to refer to your manual. If you don't like reading manuals, Google it on Google YouTube video, how do I do white balance on a whatever camera it is, and you'll be able to do that. And so one of two ways. You can do it through the Passport color checker actually has a neutral gray thing in there that is specifically for doing a white balance. And basically what you do is you set it up in the place where you're going to take the picture. You put the camera so it focuses on that area, and then you have it in custom white balance. You just hit the shutter release, and basically what the camera does, because the camera knows this should be the neutral gray or neutral white, and it reads what color that is, and then it makes the adjustments. What do I need to do to get that to white or gray? In the menu of the camera, custom white balance. The other way, what I used to do is I would just get a white canvas. If you're just whatever, so if it's printed on a canvas, I would get the canvas. If it was a watercolor, I'd get a piece of white watercolor paper and just put that so it filled the screen in that lighting, do the custom white balance. Then it's going to get, so now you're going to be somewhat managing the light. And then this is where a polarizing filter comes in. Not so important in watercolor, or it can be if you've got big dark areas where the paint gets a little shiny. Because what we want to do is minimize reflections. And if you look at any of these where the light's on them, so off big brush strokes, where that kind of faces directly at the light, you'll get a specular reflection. You'll also get it on the individual threads of the canvas in a dark area, because we're shooting with a really, really high def camera. So you might get this black area, and there's thousands of tiny little pinprick white things because that's the light reflecting off them. Well, what a polarizing filter does is it cuts out reflection. So we use a really high-tech thing. So if you're doing this outside, it's like, well, how do I know when I've cut out the reflection? You just take a piece of saran wrap, crinkle it up, hang it over the painting, and then you rotate the polarizing filter until that disappears or almost disappears. Now you know, because what you have to do is you have to get the filter in sync with the polarization of the actual light. And when you do that, it cuts down most of your, if not all, of the specular reflections. So you do that. You want to be shooting in RAW. You shoot you set the proper f-stop, shutter speed, and you want to shoot in manual mode. Again, any of the presets that you have in there, they've already done, it's going to do some stuff to that image before it saves it. So if you're shooting RAW in manual, it'll save it exactly what the color comes into the camera. Each pixel, that's what it will save. And then use your timer. I remember, I'm a pretty smart guy, but I remember this years ago, I was talking to someone when I was first shooting my work, and it's like, oh, I need to get one of those, those automatic things, that shutter release things, because every time I press the button, it shakes the camera. And this girl said, why don't you use the timer? Okay, that's a good idea. So yeah, just set the timer for like 5 seconds or whatever. You set the shutter release, step back, and there you go. So then you take your image, and then what I would say is, again, you need to look at it in the viewfinder. You may need to do a little bit of adjustment to get the exposure right. And then when you've got one you're happy with, then bracket the exposures. You know what that means? Shoot one above and shoot one below. So say the best exposure you think is f5 at a 20th of a second, right? Do one at f6 and do one at f4, because again, it might not be, the viewfinder is not a real high-tech piece of equipment in terms of showing you the image. When you get that on your computer screen, that might look too dark or too light, so bracket your exposures. And make sure you shoot this in the same light, the color checker, right? So every time you go to shoot, you need to shoot this, because the light is not going to be the same tomorrow as it was today. So every time you need to shoot this, and then apply that profile to your images that came in.
Does it have some sort of like USB connection or something?
No, you just take a photograph of it.
Oh.
You take a photograph of this, and then in Photoshop or Lightroom, it analyzes this. Yep, it actually comes with this. It'll analyze this and say, because even with the custom white balance, it is not going to record everything exactly the way it is. So this is one more thing that fine-tunes it. YouTube, yes, but YouTube. So.
You're saying shoot that the same exposure as your...
Everything the same, because you need to do it each time, because if you shoot this yesterday, that applies to the light yesterday when you shot yesterday's paintings. If you shoot next week, the light is going to be a little different. So you need this, you need a new white balance, custom white balance, and a new shot of this each time you do it, if you're shooting outside under natural light. Or you can spend hours in Lightroom and Photoshop trying to figure out, do I need to bring up the red or take down the luminance and the magenta or whatever. This will do 95% of that in a click of a button.
So is that a separate shot, or is it the same frame as your...
Separate shot. Yeah. To find out exactly how to do it, YouTube. It's not that I don't know how, but I'm not good at explaining. There are people who make their living on explaining this stuff. Like, I'll tell you the kind of basics, but any of these specifics, you're best to do that. Okay, so then we've done that. We've shot our image. You need a card reader. Obviously, I'm sure most of you have that, or you actually maybe don't now, because now a lot of the cameras are wireless. You may be able just to drop it right onto your camera. You need to get the image onto your computer, and then we do all our initial stuff in Lightroom. And so that's the thing. So the other thing you're going to need is some software. Now, Lightroom and Photoshop are absolutely essential. And again, I wish this was out there now. So Lightroom Creative Cloud, that's the stuff where basically you rent the program and you get all the updates continuously. We have the full Adobe package because we do a lot of stuff for video and audio and all that. And what do we pay a year? A lot of money for the full thing. You can get the photographer's package. Just Lightroom, just Photoshop, $10 a month. And you continually get upgraded. So even in the old days, you used to spend $300 or $400 on the program. And 2 years later, you need to upgrade the next one, and that was another $300. So $10 a month, really, really good. Per seat? What's that?
Per seat, per computer?
Probably. Or you might be able to get 3. I'm not sure. It depends. I know with our Creative Cloud, we can have it on 3 different computers. What's that?
I've got
you won't be able to do some of the stuff because Lightroom is actually produced by Adobe. It does some things better than Photoshop. And so for those, so I'll get into that. There's certain things that come up, $10 a month. So you might be able to. You might be able to, but I know professional photographers use Lightroom for a reason because it gives you so much more. That is just so much more. So Photoshop's like a hammer to adjust images. Lightroom is like a feather. So when you want to get into very subtle color adjustments, value adjustments, it's just so much more. And their print module is much better too than Photoshop's. So
Is that the website that you go to, is Lightroom?
you go to Adobe, just Google Adobe Creative Cloud, and then you sign up, look for the photographer's package, Lightroom and Photoshop.
If you're a teacher or in schools, you should be able to get discounts.
Yeah, and so then there's a significant amount of time involved in learning how to use these programs. Once again, YouTube. So whether you could probably do it free, I ended up paying for some online courses. So if you do want to do that, there's another great website which is called Creative Live. It's started by Chase Jarvis, who's a photographer. It's the largest online learning platform in the world, and it is dedicated towards photographers mostly. So you can go on and say for $49, get a 10-hour course in Lightroom, a 10-hour course in Photoshop. But you can find out most of this stuff on the internet. And also a lot of these programs, it's like you only need to know specific things. Like we only use about 2% of what Photoshop actually does. We use probably 60% of what Lightroom can do. So you only need to know what you need to know. You don't need to become a master of it. But so now let's say you've got it on your computer, you've imported it into Lightroom. Then in Lightroom, you create a profile for this, for the shot that you've taken of this that day, and you apply that profile to your image. So that will do a 95% of the color correction to get it very, very close. And then we will fine tune the image because there are some things you can just see, oh, like the darks are too dark or too light or whatever. And again, if you've got your monitor calibrated, you also get to know, it will not look exactly like your monitor because your monitor is an illuminated light source and this is reflected. But you get pretty good that we can pretty much tell just by looking at the image what the print's going to look like. And so you can make those adjustments of saying, I think the dark should be darker, or I think it should be the red should be a little more saturated, whatever. You do your fine tuning, and then what we do is we print color swatches. So, yeah.
Tim, does it matter what you do your colorimeter first, or you calibrate your monitor first? Does it matter?
Well, the colorimeter is to calibrate the monitor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you load that image on, and then you do the colorimeter on.
No. You do this. You do the colorimeter on your monitor about once a month.
Oh, okay.
Because it has drift. It will drift away from that accurate setting. So you only need to do the colorimeter about once a month. But this you need to do every time if you're shooting in a different light source every time, which you are doing if you do it outside, right? Because every day is not going to be the same. And then what we will do, once we think we've got the image really close, then we'll do test swatches. So we'll take certain parts of the image and just do little rectangles of them and do the prints out. So I want to see what the sun looks like. I want to see some areas with the darks. I want to see the color in the sky. And so, because we don't want to waste doing a whole print initially, right? Although actually we're getting pretty close to the point where we can, if in a rush, it's like, well, we'll see. It looks pretty good, print it and we'll see. But it's always a good idea to do this. So if you were actually getting work done through us, you would come and so if you dropped your work off, we would do all this, get to the test swatches, and then you would come and look at the test swatches and give us an okay, or say, well, no, I think this should be brighter, I think this should be darker, whatever. And then from here, once we've got it the way that we're happy with it, we've applied that. So then we will crop the image, and then we will take it into Photoshop. Because this image is going to be sized at whatever, like it's going to be, first I'm going to talk about resolution and dots per inch. There's a lot of confusion about that. It used to be, I don't know if it still is, I remember I used to say to galleries, what size image do you want? Well, I want it 300 dpi. It's like, what size image do you want? Well, 300 dpi. That's like, how long does it take to get to the cottage? We're going 70 miles an hour. For how long, right? So the resolution would be, like, say it's 1,000 pixels, right? So it's measured in pixels. If you were doing that 5 inches wide, that's 200 pixels per inch. If you wanted to do it 300 pixels per inch, that would be 1,500 pixels wide. So you have a native size of the image just based on your camera and how big the CCD chip and how big of an image it saves, right? What you now need to do is to change that to a very specific size and based on the resolution you want. And it might not be exact because the cameras have some distortion. So it might be a 36 by 48 painting. Well, you're actually, so all of this too is say shooting up to a 30 by 40 painting with just a half decent DSLR because with a 10 megapixel CCD chip. It might save it a little longer or a little higher because the lens has some distortion. So what you need to do in Photoshop is go in and actually resize it. And say, and we actually, what do we print at? Normally 300 for the smaller ones or 200? 240? Yeah, so there's a certain thing too with the G-Clay printing, even if you save it at 400 dots per inch, the camera, that's not going to give you any better quality than what we found, and also with the research online, is about 240 dots per inch gives you the maximum quality, so there's no point in saving it bigger than that. It just eats up any size, 240 per inch. And you can also up-res about double. So if the native, what you shoot with your camera is, works out to 120 dots per inch for the size you want, you can convert that to, you can double the res without having any loss. So you just in Photoshop, change it to that size at 200 dots per inch. There's no noticeable degradation. So on the computer, if you get down, zoom in, you'd see it, but it's not fine enough to show up in the print.
The bottom line is 240.
240 is what we do everything at. So you want to resize it to be at the size you want at 240, except, and this gave me fits. What happens, anyone know what happens generally when you wet a piece of fabric when it dries? It shrinks. The canvas shrinks. So when you print on it, when it wets the canvas, when it dries, it shrinks only on the length, not on the width. So you have to, so basically we do, I think for like an 18 by 18, what is it carrying, about 2.2 of an inch? Something like that on a big 3 by 4, might be half an inch. So the actual image size that we save it at would be 36 by 48 and a half, knowing it's going to shrink about a half an inch.
So you're saying you have to make the file size accommodate for that?
You need to set it up to print a 48 and a half inch long image because it's going to shrink to 48. What's that?
Is there a basic formula?
What do we do?
Well, generally, so say I'm doing like 48 inches, I'll add 0.4, or like 36 inch, I'll add 0.3. Like that's basically what I do. It tends to work out pretty well.
Because the other thing here, so this makes it even more fun, it doesn't shrink exactly the same every time. Even on the same day. So I was thinking, well, maybe it has to do with the relative humidity. We did a test, so and it's not noticeable when you're doing small prints, but when you're doing 6-foot long prints, like, so we did that with, when we were doing our big Shall We Dance prints, so they were like about 6 feet long, because when we send our stuff to get stretched, like they were coming back, like, well, this one's 48 and an eighth, this one's 48 and a quarter, this one's 39, and we said, we'll do them all the same size. He said, the prints aren't all the same size. And it's like, they have to be the same size, it's digital. He said, they're not, and so we do the mirroring so that there's a little bit of give, right? If you do the edge black, and it's slightly off, and that black comes around the side, so the mirroring makes it less easy to smooth. So we did 3 prints in a row, same day, on a 6-foot long print. They were off by 3/16 from one to the next. So
Is it safer just to do the mirroring?
if you do the mirroring, yeah, but they still like to do them bang on. So because I said it'd be easier if we're sending you 10 prints the same size, just do all the stretchers up. And they like, no.
It only shrinks one way, not the other.
Yeah, it only shrinks off the length of the roll. The width does not shrink at all as you're going down. It's just off the length. So whatever that is going to be, and then it just takes some playing around, right? So
If you've done a painting and you have black all the way around, it's
yeah,
just shrinking one way.
that's a painting. That's not a giclée.
When you're talking about mirroring, are you just talking about?
Okay, I'm going to get into that. We're going to get into that. So
Wait, yeah, before you start again, just some people came in late, just so you guys all know, like we're recording all this, and this is going to go up on YouTube. So if you're struggling to kind of keep track of what's going on, you can rewatch it. You don't have to worry about that.
oh, I missed something or writing everything down. Okay, so that's the whole thing about sizing. And then what we do in Photoshop is we do the mirroring. And again, because of that whole shrinking thing, if you have a black edge, which is how I do my originals, anyone have any idea why I just paint my originals black, the edges? Because framing is the worst investment you can make in your artwork in terms of return on the dollar. No, framing is not a bad investment in how the artwork looks. It's just as a business proposition, spending money on framing, because that is just something that someone is going to say, I love that painting, can you change the frame? So I do totally agree that most things framed will look better. However, this is really, really big now, this look in current design, so that's one good thing. And if someone wants something framed, we have all the frame samples, but I know I'm only framing that piece once, and that person's paying for the framing, not me. So that's why I do all of these black.
Are you painting it black or using like?
I paint it black with acrylic. Paint it black with acrylic.
Just like painter's tape on the edge, I guess, but no, just very.
I do it first.
Steady hand.
No, I do it first.
I see, okay,
And so as soon as I finish the painting,
yeah.
it's ready to go out there. Okay, getting back to the giclées. So that whole mirroring thing is good because this can be off. So what we have here, you can see it here, I'll show you. Remember when you were a kid, you'd do those things where you'd have the color and you'd put it together and you'd open it up and you get like the butterfly? So that's basically what happens here, right? That shows up really well on this edge. Right along there. So what we do in Photoshop is we go in and we select a 2-inch rectangle of the painting at the very edge. We copy it, we flip it, and then we move it to the outside edge. And then we do that all the way around. So you do like these two sides, and then you do these two there. And then you have, so where the edge of the painting is, it's not a real hard line, right? So if when they stretch it, it's slightly too far around this way or slightly too far this way, you don't notice. If you do this, because we initially did our giclées with a black edge, and my framer called me, I was like, we can't do this. He's like, I've restretched this 5 times, and like they just cannot get it that accurate. And the fact that every print is going to be slightly different size because of the stretching. So that's why we do the mirroring.
Do you paint the black edge after you get it back from?
That's an original. That's the giclée. So all this we're talking about tonight is giclées, right? For my originals, I actually paint the canvas edge black first, and then just complete the painting. Okay, so you've done the mirroring, and then the last thing that we do, where are we? We go on, and just on text, just on pages, we use a Mac, we just put the text. So it's like, it will say, what does this one say here? Copyright Tim Packer, all rights reserved, Shining Birches Lake Batiste, edition size 118 by 18, reproduced from an original painting by Tim Packer, published by Tim Packer Fine Arts, Whitby, Ontario, Canada, printed in Canada. That's important because that applies to free trade stuff, where it was made, where it was printed, all that. Plus, it has your copyright thing there. I don't know if it has come in yet, but they were talking about in copyright, making a change, an exemption in the law, that if someone finds an image they want to use and they can't find out who the owner of that image is, and then they use it, yeah, they're kind of covered because they made attempts. So you should have on all of your prints who you are. Same thing with your images. You can set up in Lightroom so that every time you import an image, it applies the metadata to say your name, say your company, all that kind of stuff, your email, so that no one ever has the ability to say, oh, well, we saw this image, but we didn't know who the owner was. We tried to find him, right? That's just another copyright thing.
And where do you put the information?
Just on the bottom. So outside of the, at the very bottom of the mirroring, because what we have here, oh, the one thing I should have said,
It'll be on the mirror.
no. What you want to do too, if you're going to do it on the wide stretchers, you need 3 inches all the way around of the image. So what you end up with is 2 inches of mirroring and then 1 inch of blank canvas, because they need that to pull it around and then on the back to staple it. What we also do, also when they stretch it though, you want them to stretch it first on the axis that it shrunk on, because that's where there's going to be the most give. So we also put on there, stretch in this direction first. This, so then you know it came off the printer this way.
You literally have that written.
It's written on there with the arrow, stretch in this direction first. So they know that, because that's when they're going to get, if they stretch it this way first, then that's going to limit how much they can stretch it that way. So you want the very first stretch to be along that axis where it initially shrunk. Okay, where am I here? Yep, so then so that's sort of it. But then we have to get into printer profiles. So again, about that managing the color through every stage of the process. If you just think it makes sense, right? If I am printing this image on 5 different printers, on 5 different types of surface, maybe a glossy paper, maybe a canvas, maybe a matte paper, they're all going to look a little different, because of each printer is probably going to print a little different color, and each substrate is going to absorb the ink or reflect light a little bit different. So what all of the manufacturers of high-end printers have is they have printer profiles. So what they have done is basically similar to this, only they'll print out, so the same thing, they'll get an image that is a Pantone color chart where they know what the values are of every color that's printed out there. They'll print out those color charts. Then they'll use a very expensive colorimeter, similar to this, but that's meant to measure the values on paper. And it'll go along and it'll measure all of those squares of color, and it will say, well, it's off here, it needs 10% more yellow, it needs to bring the red down, whatever. It makes all of those adjustments to the print as it's going from the print, from your computer to the printer. And it's in your actual print dialog. You choose the printer profile that you're going to do. But for example, for the Epson Stylus Pro 9900, which we have, you go to Epson, go to Stylus Pro 9900 printer profiles. They've got hundreds. You're doing AGFA, you're printing on Epson, you're printing on Breathing, whatever. You need to download the printer profile for your printer and the actual surface you're printing on, and then you apply that to your computer and in Lightroom so that all of your prints now have that printer profile done to them, and then you should get a very accurate image. If you miss any of those, if you miss any of those color management things, so starting with taking the white balance when you shoot the photo, not shooting this and applying that profile to your photo, not using this to calibrate your monitor, and not applying the printer profile as you're doing the prints, you can have the most beautiful image on your computer, and who knows what you're going to get. So that's what I was experiencing when I was trying to get work done for me, and that was also what I was experiencing when I was first starting to print, and it's just like, holy geez, like the images were so bizarre on the actual computer monitor to give a good print. Because there was no color management anywhere through the process. Okay, where are we now? URs. Oh, and so then it comes into how do we, so we talked already. We still do the paper prints through Koymans. I'm no longer doing paper prints and framing them with glass. Glass is the worst. It's terrible to ship. It also, if you look at those paintings back there, you look at them anywhere, what you see in a image with glass on it is what's opposite it. You can't put it across from a window because it gets a reflection. So we are really just doing, we'll do prints for people on paper if you want them, but I would recommend for large format, anything like 18 by 18 or bigger, doing it like this, stretching it on stretchers, and anything smaller than that. Cameron, can you just go get one of the ones up there, and I'll bring it up here to show you. I'd recommend that. I think it far and away, it's the best presentation of a small to medium-sized thing. And so we get all of our stretching and our framing done at Posters Unlimited. They're in Markham on, what are they on, Hood Road, Cameron? Posters Unlimited. It's a really weird name, but they do amazing. So we basically just ship them the canvas giclée. So here's one here. This is a paper one. I'm not even sure why we have that. Oh, because initially what we were doing is we were getting these mounted on paper, the paper ones mounted on the board, and then varnishing them. But the varnish kind of was kind of milky and it took away from it. That's before this varnishless canvas came out. And when this varnishless canvas came out, it's like perfect. But basically we just send them these. No, flat. Send them flat. No, they mount them on board. They frame them. They put nice paper on the back, put the hangers, put these over top, and then we go pick them up. And then we ship. So that's another thing is for shipping. We use a multitude of different shipping companies, but what we found is Costco has an amazing app called ShipTime. ShipTime. And so Costco. So what you do is you put in you say, this is the size of the package. So the 3 dimensions, this is how much it weighs. And ShipTime says, well, UPS, this is where it's going. UPS will charge this. Campar will charge this. FedEx will charge this, whatever. And it's different all the time. Like there's no one that's best. So every time we ship, we just go on ShipTime, see which one is the best, and that's who we ship through. And we use Campar. Campar, it ends up being a lot, and Campar comes to our house. So we just have them at the front door. They come ring the doorbell. Pick up. Here you go. All the documents get printed at home. So through that ShipTime, we print all the documents, just put them on there. They just come to the house, pick them up, gone. I don't know, Google. Where do you get the ShipTime app? Seriously, Google I learned all of this stuff that I'm doing on Google. It's amazing. But I don't know. I don't handle, I'm not being glib there. It's just my wife handles the shipping documents, so I don't know. But I know that's what we use. And I saw this, and it's like, this is great. Because we'd be driving stuff to the UPS or driving stuff to the FedEx, and it's like, yeah, they'll come pick it up right at your house. So that's the process start to finish, kind of working on a budget, right? So now I'm going to talk about what we have that's kind of above this. And it's not a lot of different things. It's just higher end equipment. So we use the camera. What is it? You got the Nikon D800 back there? Yeah. So it's a Nikon D800. At the time I bought it, it was the largest CCD chip you could get. Actually, we have the D800E. And it has something, does anybody know what a moire is? When you have like 2 grids over top of each other, you get that kind of swirly pattern, right? And so they have an anti-aliasing filter in all digital cameras, and it's to prevent that happening, like when you shoot bricks or anything where there's like a regular checkerboard thing. But it also somewhat degrades the edge detail of the image. So the Nikon D800E was the first camera they came out with without an anti-aliasing filter. So it's not really great if I was doing architectural stuff, because then you could get the moire patterns. But I shoot a lot of natural stuff, and so that works out really well not having the anti-aliasing. Yeah, and it's amazing quality. And we also have, so that camera, at the time I bought it, I think it was a $4,000 or $5,000 camera. We have a 105 millimeter Nikkor lens that's about a $3,000 lens. 105 millimeters. And the reason I bought a 105 millimeter, the reason I bought that lens, any guesses why?
Doing far away video filming?
No. Because the guy Vistec said that's what you need. And he's right.
I got the 50.
So the only problem with this is you need to be able to get the camera back far enough. If you're shooting in a more confined space, then you might want something that's a little wider angle. But this is amazing, amazing detail. So, yeah, then you would want something that's got a wider angle. But again, that's what we have. So then we also have these Elechrome lights. And so when we talked about if you're shooting outdoors, every time you shoot, the light is going to be a little bit different, right? So then you have to go through that whole rigmarole. Where's the light switch? There it is. Okay, you have to go through that whole rigmarole of doing the custom white balance, of shooting the passport color checker, and importing that color profile every time. So we shoot in our basement. We turn off all of the lights, and so the only light that is going to be used is the light from these lights. So that means the light's going to be exactly the same every time. So once we have set up our custom white balance, and once we've shot our passport color checker to get the profile, it will be exactly the same every time. But now you run into the problem of polarizing filters, because polarizing only occurs on natural light, sunlight. There's no polarization on regular light. So what you need to do, this is polarizing film. Okay, so this is polarizing film over each of the barn doors there. And these lights have what's called mall lights. So those are the lights that are on right now. So when we're in our basement with all the lights off, it's still illuminated through these lights, and it's polarized because the light is coming through a polarizing filter. So now we do the saran wrap over the painting, we adjust it to get rid of the reflections, and then we go to shoot. So we have an infrared transmitter that hooks up to the camera. You can hook these up by cable, but they don't recommend it because every once in a while you get a surge of power going back through the cable and you can fry your $4,000 camera. So we don't want to do that. That's generally about however wide you have, right? Yeah, and you don't necessarily, we have these for shooting really, really big paintings because these are very powerful, right? But what we do is, so this goes into the hot shoe on the top of the camera, and we have these synced for 200th of a second, and when we press the shutter release, it exposes for 200th of a second. These flash for 200th of a second. It's perfectly synced. We get the exact same light every single time we shoot. So that makes life much, much more easy. Not having... Yeah, you could get something down. Vistec, I'm sure there is. Go talk to the guy. So basically what you would do is you'd say to them, here's what I have. I have a room this big where I have to shoot. What lens do you recommend? What lights do you recommend? That's it, and they'll steer you right. So this we use, this is great because it makes that environment in which we shoot exactly the same every single time. And we have a custom white balance that we've set up that we just put on there. So that means that right when the stuff comes into the camera, it's pretty tight. We apply the, can you get that for me, Scotty? Just the orange thing, turn it off. We apply the color checker profile. It's pretty close. It's certainly, if we just did that, it's better than 90% of what you're going to get out there.
When do you need to stitch? If you've got 30 megapixels.
We're getting there. We're getting there. Okay, so that's, where am I, what we have. Okay. Sync for flash, Okay, so the other thing that comes up is, so you're sort of limited by the memory on your camera in terms of how big you can shoot. And what we found is with ours, which is I don't know what it is, 35 or 40 megapixel, something like that, a 30 by 40 with a single shot reproduces really well. But if you want to make it bigger, then you start losing edge detail. So then you need to take panoramas, right? So it's the same thing. You've probably taken a panorama outside where you shoot 4 paintings and it stitches them together. Do the same thing here, except this needs to be very precise. They all have to be shot at coming from exactly the same place. You know, I did that first. I thought you moved the camera. No. So what you need is a tripod that can rotate on the 2 axes. Let me hold this way and up and down. So what you do is you set up your camera kind of so that so say you're shooting a piece this big, right? You would set up your camera so that it's centered to shoot this area, right? And then you focus it on that, you get it all set up, and then what you do is you rotate it up until it takes in this corner. You shoot that. You rotate it across to take in the middle, you rotate it across to take here, then you angle it down to take here. So you would take 9 pictures of this, but they all have to be coming from exactly the same place. You can't move, you can't be moved. Well, it won't so those 12 photos or those 9 photos in Lightroom, you import them, you just select them all, you go create panorama, and it stitches them all together. I'm not sure. I know that in Lightroom, it works really, really well. No, it's all right from the same place. So you need a good, so that's another investment in a tripod. Now you can also do it in one that's just the ball mount, where you're just kind of doing it across, but this is a little more accurate, having it rotate in all 3 axes. It's a 3-axis mount. I don't know. That's what the guy in Vistec told me to buy. He was right. But the problem there too is, just your half-decent desktop computer ain't gonna handle it, right? This then creates, some of our image files are a gigabyte for a photo. If you try and do that on a PC, come back in an hour and a half and reboot your PC because you've crashed it. So because of the size of these image files, I would really recommend, if you're gonna be doing this, you wanna move to a Mac. And so for me, I'm on my 2nd generation 27-inch iMac. More because we started doing video, and video really crunches it. But so I have like the latest 27-inch iMac with the fastest dual processors, the most RAM available, the best graphics card, all that kind of stuff. Because I can guarantee you a regular PC will not handle an image that size, and it won't be able to do the stitching. It takes up an incredible amount of power. So that's if you're going to be doing that, like, will your computer do it or not? It's like you'd have to try and see, right? Let me finish. You're getting me off here. And then the other thing that we have is we have a Wacom tablet and pen stylus. So if you're doing all of your corrections with a mouse, right? That's again like using a hammer. This is a tablet that has a sensitive surface about this big, that has a special stylus that's pressure sensitive. Well, it depends. Sometimes you have to if you've got specular reflections that still come through, you're painting pixels, right? So again, we're just saying if you want to get the nth degree of being able to make changes, you can also go in and do specific changes in specific areas using Lightroom, but the stylus can be much more accurate for very specific stuff. So that's kind of the upgrade that we have. And then we have the Epson Stylus Pro 9900, which I'm still amazed. I bought that 10 years ago, $6,000. $6,000, like a Heidelberg 5-color press with like 1.2 million, like that my dad worked on that couldn't do anywhere near this. So it's amazing. And then if you're going to get, the thing is now, if you're just doing this kind of stuff, you don't even need storage. Like I say, we have so much of our house was taken up with storage, with the flat files, with the hanging files, but you don't even need that now. But that's our kind of upgraded version. So it's not that much different, it's just more expensive pieces of equipment that either kind of make it a duplicatable process or just give us better image quality or more processing power or larger printer. So if you are going to start doing your publishing, then you again have the two options about whether you want to sell your prints through galleries or whether you want to sell and distribute them yourself. Both are valid options. The one thing with the galleries are you have limited control over, right? You have to approach the gallery and they have to want your work, and you're gonna make less money off each print. If you're gonna do it yourself, you're gonna reap all the rewards. You are total in charge of the whole process. And I would recommend that because that is also, I think, the best way to get into galleries. Because I say galleries, like, if you're selling, they want some. So if you start doing your own publishing and releasing your own prints, people come into the gallery and say, do you have any prints by this person? Or they see that you're at a festival doing it or whatever, right? It's just the more that you are successful, the more a gallery is gonna want a piece of you if that's what you're interested in. But if you're gonna create your own distribution, there's several ways that you can do the sales. So you've got your online sales, so that's a website, and an online store. So that's what we have. So we have a pretty extensive website that Cameron, I designed my first 3 websites, and then when he started working for me, I just said, you've got a university education, you're good at learning, I need you to, here's what I want, you need to learn how to do it on Google and do it. And he did. And we got a great website. And we have been offering for years our prints online, saying contact us, and then we'll make arrangements for the payment, and we'll ship them to you rolled in a tube, and you can get them stretched at your end. Any guesses on if people like that? No, right? They're like, where do I get this stretched? What if the person screws up the stretching? So we finally bit the bullet when we launched our online store. So we ship everything stretched, and that has seen a quantum leap in the amount of online sales. And we have an online store where they just click add to cart, and we do that through Shopify. Again, how difficult was that? It took you about a week. Yeah, so again, I said, Cameron, we need a Shopify site. Google it, find out how to do it, and then make me one, right? It's great. So that's how we do our online stuff. And then the other options are doing festivals and fairs, that type of thing. Doing a pop-up gallery, so I did that last year, and that's where you rent spaces. There are galleries out there where you can rent them for a week or 2 weeks or whatever, and then you... Gallery 67 at space. Hey, so I did my show last year. I did 35,000 in sales in 10 days out of that gallery. That was the thing that made me decide, gee, maybe Oshawa's a pretty good place to have a gallery. Because I did 2 pop-up galleries in Toronto, one for a week and one for a month, and the total sales of those 2 didn't equal the sales I did out here. Plus, I hate driving into Toronto. So does everybody else. Parking sucks in Toronto. Rush hour 6 hours a day. Easy to get to here. And guess how big people's houses are in Toronto? They're condos. They're not looking for 6-foot giclées. It's just wall-to-wall big houses from Scarborough out to the 115 now. So this actually is a good area for art. Who'd have thought? So that, and then eventually owning your own gallery, right? So if you're doing all of that stuff, publishing your own work makes a lot of sense. Only now because of social media. 10 years ago, this only made sense if you had gallery distribution, because the average person, even me back then and being very successful, I mean, I would sell them at my open house, and I would sell them at festivals, but I would do 15 to 20,000 in direct sales a year. That was it. Now we're doing over 100 every year. And it's only because of social media. So if you are going to publish yourself, you need to learn about social media, and you need to get into social media. Because there's the whole thing that you just can't get around. Before you can tell people how wonderful your giclées are and show them how beautiful they are, you have to get their attention. And their attention right now is on social media. And social media is vastly underpriced, and in most cases it's free. So in the old days, while in the old days you needed the publishers to be able to print the stuff because you weren't going to invest millions of dollars in it, you also needed the publishers and the galleries to get your work in front of people. Now that's no longer the case. There's no gatekeepers. The people who decide what becomes popular on the internet is the public. And so if you create good content, then you can create a huge following. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about social media. So I did one of these talks at Gallery 67 last year on social media. It's probably about an hour and 20 minutes, like 45-minute talk and 45-minute Q&A on social media. So I'd recommend if you haven't seen it, you watch that. But I'm just going to talk about some of the basics. Social media is not like traditional transactional marketing, where you put an ad out there and you expect people to respond and you get sales. Social media is about creating relationships with people and developing devoted fans of you, your work, and your brand. And make no mistake, if you, as an artist, you are a brand if you are going to get into this. Not just your work, but you as well. And what you need is to get views, right? To get attention. The way you do that is by giving value. And you hear that all the time. Content, 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 give value. But what does that mean? It's really simple. Your content needs to either entertain, educate, or inspire. Those are the three things. Every single piece of content you put out there, you should be thinking about that. Ideally, it will do all three. So, and for me, the best example of that is if I do there's been a number of paintings I've done this size where we set up the camera, we do time lapses of it, it produces a 4-minute video. So you see me going right from the red canvas to this finished in 4 minutes. That's entertaining and maybe inspiring if you're watching it or whatever, but do 4 minutes of voiceover where I'm explaining exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Now it's entertaining, it's educational, and it's inspiring. I had one of my time lapses, it did well, but it got reposted on another big site. It got 350,000 views of me doing a painting, free. Right? So you know what that would cost in the old days of traditional marketing? Like, so it doesn't matter, a gallery, publisher, whatever, they can't do that. Like, money will only buy you so much exposure, but great content can go viral. I had an image of me there it is there, Shall We Dance, that small piece there. The original was 4 feet by 7 piece. A picture of me beside that painting went viral on LinkedIn. Our second time of using LinkedIn, because I was doing good on Facebook, I was doing good on Instagram, but Instagram is a lot of young people. They can't afford my work yet, so I'm working on my clients 10, 15 years down the road. They're all going to get married, they're all going to buy homes, so those fans are going to be buying my work then. Facebook is actually pretty good. Do a lot of contacts through Facebook that generate sales. But I read that the average LinkedIn user makes over 100 grand a year. It's like, that's my audience I want to get in front of. So Cameron and I both took a class on LinkedIn online to figure out how we could put content on LinkedIn that was relevant and would get engagement. We both got nothing. And so then we came back to Gary Vaynerchuk. If you're going to write down one thing tonight, write down Gary Vaynerchuk or Gary V, and just Google him. That's where I've learned everything about social media marketing, is from him, from his videos, from his books. But what he said, and it's true, he said creative people have it so easy to create content, is everyone else has to actually create content. We're creating art, all you have to do is document it. At the very least, every day you take a picture of what you've done. If you're painting a painting, you set up your camera to do a time lapse. All you have to do is document that's creating content. And so we decided, you know what, let's try that on LinkedIn. It was our second post. Got 110,000 likes, like 20,000 comments. Became a whole big thing. LinkedIn ended up suspending my account because they thought I was using illegal software to get the engagement. I ended up on Global's morning show talking about, because LinkedIn suspended my account because I said thank you. I was on 1010 Talk Radio. They had Chex TV at the show at Gallery on the Lake. The painting sold in the first hour of the show. In the second hour of the show, we had someone call from England who wanted to buy it, but it had already gone. So he commissioned a $17,000 painting off me. Like, all of this stuff just from LinkedIn. What's that?
What was different with that post versus the one that you tried?
Nothing. So what often happens is, it's written.
You did a video or something?
Just a picture. picture of me sitting beside the original post in my shorts and paint-covered t-shirt. It just went, you can't explain why stuff goes viral. It just does. What often happens is people with big followings, if they like it or share it, then it goes out, and then it went on for months. I was spending an hour or 2 hours a day answering comments. I still get occasionally, so that was almost 3 years ago. I still get on LinkedIn a comment. It's like, oh, comment number 30,027. Oh, I love this piece. It's from that post back there. It's still out there. So the thing with social media too is it's give, ask, right? So it's not like traditional advertising. Hey, here's my stuff, buy it. It's like, I'm going to give you lots of stuff. Educational, entertaining, inspiring, and occasionally, I'm going to ask you to do something. Whether it's, here's our features Giclée that's on sale this week. Here's a course I'm doing that we'd like to come to. I've come out with a book. Here's this. And that whole idea of building that community and relationship, as Gary Vaynerchuk says, if you do it really well, you guilt people into buying stuff because you've given them so much value. And I've actually seen it happen. I saw it happen at Gallery 67 when so there was people that came in and she said, oh, I follow you on Facebook all the time. I'm a hobbyist artist and I've learned so much. And I have a YouTube channel. I've got like 130, 140 videos on my YouTube channel. So they came in, she said, oh, I love your stuff, I follow your work, I've learned so much, and they came, but they said, we just want to let you know, we're just here to see your work, we want to see it in person, but we're not here to buy. And I said, that's fine. So I sat there and I chatted with them for an hour and a half. And they said, okay, we're going to go. I said, well, it was really nice meeting you, take care. They walked away and they talked, and I'm sure the conversation was, we got to buy something. Right? They literally were guilted in because I'd given them so much value. And when they came, I spent an hour and a half talking to them. They're like, we got to buy something. They just feel they owe it. And I know that works for me with Gary Vaynerchuk. I bought every one of his books. When he came out with T-shirts with sayings on it. Yeah, give me 10 T-shirts. Because I know I've learned so much from him. It's like, I just feel like, yeah, that's Vistec. That's why I go back to Vistec. They've given me so much value. They've guilted me that I would feel guilty about going anywhere else. Even if I went down and it's like, here's the camera you want, I could then just go home and go online and see if I get it cheaper, but I wouldn't sleep as well, right? It's like and so that's the whole thing with social media. You give, and then occasionally ask. And again, so you give without expectation of anything in return, and you make that very clear. You don't kind of give and ask at the same time. When you ask, or his book is actually jab, 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 right hook. So jabs are giving, right hook is asking. When you ask, you make it clear you're asking. Here's my latest print. It's, here's the deal. I'm not giving you anything here. I want you to buy my stuff. You don't give and ask at this. You don't the worst thing is those, here's a free video on how to do this. And basically all it is a sales ploy for you to buy their thing. Now, I do that sort of, but I don't care if any one of you has ever come in here and get me to do printing for you. I don't care if you buy my book. I don't care, whatever. I just, because I know that some people probably will, right? If some people just come, take all the information, go do it, then great, because then I've also really helped somebody else kind of in their career. So you really have to do that, give without expectation, because people can tell when you're trying to scam. If you're going to give them, give them. If you're going to ask, let them know it's an ask. And then the other thing is you have to be authentic about your story. You can't fake, you can't front. A lot of people out there renting Ferraris for the day and taking a picture in front of their Ferrari, say, oh, buy my course and you'll have one of these. People see through that pretty quickly. And that comes into, so some of you know Brooke Cormier. It's a young artist that I'm mentoring who started about 2 years ago. I'm friends with her parents. She really impressed me with some dealings we'd had together. And she was a landscape architect. She just graduated from school, from Guelph. And after her parents paying for a 4-year university education, she came to them and said, I don't want to do this. I want to be an artist. And her dad told me this while we were on the golf course, and the look in his eye was, it's your fucking fault, right? Because she had got to know me, and we'd done some printing for her. And so he was very concerned. And I said, I I think she should. I think she's really talented, but she also impressed me with her work ethic and her business acumen. Business acumen is a big thing a lot of artists don't have. Even at 22, it was really clear that she did. So I said, I'll mentor her, but I'll only do it on the condition that we film all of our sessions and then we put those up on the YouTube channel. And so that was one of the things that when I talked to her is about you have to be authentic to who you are. So when I do all of my videos and everything else, I'm from a position of I've been doing this almost 20 years. I'm very successful as an artist. I know a lot, and so that's where I'm speaking from. And I'm trying to give information and help people. I said, your story is you're 22 years old, you've made this huge decision, you're scared shitless, you have no idea what you're doing. Let's see what happens, right? So that's what you have to be authentic to. You can't be trying to front that you know what you don't or that you are what you aren't. You just have to be that. So that was her authentic story, and people bought in. Like I say, she went from, so I gave her a fairly long thing about social media, about all this stuff, and then we talked a lot about what her strategy should be and doing all this. And so I'm doing pretty good for an old guy. I only ever had a cell phone in case I went off the road and needed it for an emergency, right? I opened my very first app on a cell phone just over 2 years ago. So I didn't know none of this stuff. So for an old guy that doesn't know it, having 20,000 followers on Facebook, just shy of 10 on Instagram, 9 on LinkedIn, and 3,000 YouTube followers, I'm doing pretty good. She has shown what a young, cute girl who's grown up with this stuff and is native to it, who is also an amazing photographer. So I'm learning from her about how to be creative with your posts. But she's gone from a couple hundred followers to over, like I think she's at 120,000 on Instagram. I had her at Facebook and she just passed me. We did a paint out together last month and we were looking, and it's like, shit, she's ahead of me by 100 on Facebook now. And in her first year as a professional artist, she did over 30,000 in sales. She's doing prints and selling them around the world. She has her own online store. She was just over yesterday to pick up some prints from us that she sold. But she is a really great example of what social media can do if you're really, really good at it. And I would also recommend, so you asked me about Instagram, check out her feed. Because that's all I can say is just check out what she does. Now, she's prettier than you and I, but the thing that amazes me is over 50% of her following is women. And a lot of them young women, and she's become a really big role model for young girls. She's got young girl fans all over the world because she's this young girl who's, it's like, that's what I said to her, you could be a product photographer and be making tons of money. But she's a really good example of what social media can be, and especially for some of the younger people in here that maybe are a little more familiar with it, and for some of you old dogs, like I say, I did not even know how to open an app on my phone 2 years ago, and everything I do now is on my phone. So that's the presentation. Now we get to questions.
Well, I hope you found that helpful. It's amazing how much goes into all of this kind of stuff. And we still have one more part to add, and that's the questions and answers. So we still have to edit that, but that will be up shortly. So watch out for part 3. That'll be just a little bit add on to this.